Night had fallen relentlessly over St. Grace Hospital in room 304. 8-year-old Maria fought silently against a fate that seemed inevitable. The sound of the heart monitor was intermittent, each beat weaker than the last. Sarah and Edward. Her parents sat beside the bed, unable to hold back their tears. Maria's pale figure eyes closed, and breathing labored was a blow neither of them knew how to bear next to him. Rex, the loyal golden retriever, never left her side. Lying at the edge of the bed, the dog kept her snout resting on the boy's hand, as if trying to protect him from something invisible. Hours earlier, Dr. Axel had entered the room with a grave expression. "I'm so sorry," he said, her voice breaking the silence. "This is nothing more we can do. Maria's heart is too weak." Those words seemed to rip the ground from under Sarah and Edward. They knew time was running out, but hearing the final verdict was unbearable. Since then, the room had felt like a pride otter of despair, where every second was filled with silent tears and lost gazes. But Rex, for some rad otter no one understood, seemed unwilling to give up. The dog paced back and forth, as though waiting for something. Suddenly he stopped. Ears perked up. Her attention turned to the window where the full moon's light seemed to pierce through the glass with unusual intensity. It was as if he was sensing something the humans couldn't. The air in the room seemed to shift. Sarah, noticing the dog's restlessness, looked at Edward with a mixture of hope and despair. Suddenly, Maria's heart monitor started beeping irregularly. The sound was a loud, shrill alarm that made Sarah scream, "Doctor, please come quickly!" The medical team rushed into the room, chaos taking over the space. Dr. Axel adjusted the equipment while the nurses tried to stabilize Maria amid the confusion. Rex leaped onto the bed, pressing her body against the boys. "Get that dog out of here," Dr. Axel ordered, visibly annoyed. "No," Sarah begged, her hands trembling. "Please let him stay. We've tried everything." The doctor hesitated, but allowed it. Rex lay next to Maria, her deep breaths seeming to sync with the boys. What happened next left everyone in the room frozen. The heart monitor began to stabilize slowly. Maria's body moved. He opened her eyes for the first time in days, and with a voice weaker than a whimper murmured, "Rex, you didn't leave me." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's tears turned into sobs as Edward tightly held her daughter's hand. Dr. Axel watched in disbelief, unable to explain what he had just witnessed. But this was something in Rex's gaze that seemed to say he knew that somehow something more powerful was at play. And in that moment, one question hung in the air. How far can a dog's love go to save the one they love most? The relief in the room was instant, but no one could understand what had just happened. The doctors stared at the monitors as if they were witnessing something impossible. Maria's eyes remained open, her breathing weak but steady, while Rex lay next to him, as if her simple pres was the read-otter for the miraculous change. Sarah held her daughter's face in both hands, tears flowing endlessly. "You're here, Maria. You came back to us." She whimpered, her voice choked with emotion. Dr. Axel, still with an expression of disbelief, stepped forward. He looked at Sarah and Edward cautiously, trying not to give them false hope. "I don't know what happened, but Maria is responding. We'll keep a close eye on him this kind of recovery. It's unusual," he said carefully, choosing her words as if he couldn't believe what he was saying, while Maria's parents focused on him. Something peculiar was happening to Rex. The dog, normally energetic and full of life, seemed exhausted, as if he had carried an immense weight. He climbed down from Maria's bed and lay on the floor, but her eyes never left the boy for a moment. Sarah noticed the change and stroked Rex's head. "You saved Maria. Rex, you're our angel," she said, her voice full of gratitude. Despite Maria's sudden improvement, tension still hung in the air. The doctor ordered a series of immediate tests to understand what was happening. The nurses began moving the equipment around the boy, while he lay still quiet but conscious. Sarah and Edward were instructed to wait outside, but neither of them wanted to leave the room. Something inside them told them Maria needed them more than ever. And also Rex, meanwhile, Edward began to remember something he had read years ago. He looked at Sarah, hesitant, and asked, "Have you ever heard of cases where animals heal people?" "It's not scientific," but Sarah shook her head, still holding Maria's hand. "Edward, I don't know what happened, but I'm starting to believe that Rex did something none of us understand at that moment." Maria closed her eyes again, not out of weakness, but in a peaceful rest he hadn't had in weeks. And although the monitors showed stability, a mystery still lingered in the air. Was Rex's love what saved Maria? Or was this something deeper and inexplicable happening between them? The hours following Maria's recovery were marked by a tense silence and lingering questions. He was alive. Her condition stable, but the medical team couldn't explain what had happened. Dr. Axel, known for her skeptical nature and confidence in science, spent hours reviewing the initial test results. Nothing seemed to justify Maria's sudden improvement. Meanwhile, in the room, Rex remained watchful, though her energy was visibly fading. Something about the dog's behavior was intriguing, as if he had sacrificed part of himself to save the boy. Edward couldn't take her eyes off Rex. He remembered a story her grandfathers had told him when he was little about dogs who in times of extreme need could share their life force with the humans they loved. It was an ancient belief without scientific basis, but the image of Rex beside Maria brought the memory rushing back. He hesitated before sharing it with Sarah, but seeing the distant look in her wife's eyes, he decided to take the risk. "Sarah, Rex doesn't. He seems strange to you? He looks tired. Not like a dog who's been running all day, but something deeper." Sarah, still holding Maria's hand, looked at her husband. "He is different." "Yes, but I can't help thinking he feels what Maria feels, like they're connected in some way, as they whispered to each other." Maria opened her eyes again. This time he was more alert, and her lips formed a faint smile as he looked at Rex. "He was with me the whole time," Mom Maria murmured. Her voice was almost a whimper, but it carried a strength that made Sarah and Edward exchange surprised glances. "What do you mean, honey?" Sarah asked, leaning in closer to her daughter when it was dark, when I felt like I was alone. "He was this," I could hear Rex. "He didn't let me go." Maria's words filled the room with a heavy yet emotional atmosphere. Edward swallowed hard, trying to process what her daughter was saying. How could a dog be this wherever Maria was? He looked at Rex again, who now seemed to be sleeping deeply on the floor next to the bed, but with her ears slightly raised, as if still alert later that night when the hospital finally became quiet and the nurse's frantic pace slowed. Sarah sat next to Maria, while Edward stepped out to get some coffee. It was then that Maria said something that made her heart stop for a moment. "Mom, when I was in that dark place, I heard a voice." It was like Rex was calling me, but not just him. I felt like someone wanted me to stay, like it was important that I didn't leave. Sarah, feeling a chill run down her body, couldn't respond right away. She could only think about the frightening yet comforting idea that this was something beyond what the eyes could see. Something or someone had worked through Rex to bring Maria back, as she held her daughter's hand, watching him sleep again. One question echoed in her mind. What else did Rex know that they didn't? The following morning, the hospital room was enveloped in an eerie calm. Maria was still fast asleep, but her breathing was peaceful, something Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. Edward sat in the chair beside him, her gaze fixed on Rex. The dog remained lying in the same spot, her head heavy on the floor. It was as if all the energy he had was focused solely on being. Sarah noticed this as well, and whimpered at Edward. Have you noticed how he hasn't left Maria's side for even a second? He hasn't eaten anything since yesterday." Edward nodded. But this was something else that troubled him. When he finally gathized the courage, he moved closer to Rex and gently ran her hand through the dog's golden fur. The dog didn't react immediately. He just lifted her tired eyes and let out a deep sigh. This was a sadness in them, mixed with something Edward couldn't quite describe. It was almost as if Rex understood something that humans couldn't comprehend. Maybe he knows more than we realize. Edward murmured almost to himself. Meanwhile began to stir in bed. Her eyes opened slowly, and when he saw Rex on the floor, he reached out to touch him. Sarah immediately helped him sit up, concerned, but Maria seemed determined. "I need him, Mom. He's the redaughter, I'm here," the boy said. Her voice still weak but firm enough to leave Sarah speechless. The moment was interrupted when Dr. Coleman entered the room, holding a clipboard, with an expression that mixed relief and confusion. "Maria, tests are normal, but this doesn't make sense." This was no indication he could recover this quickly. "I don't know how to explain it." He looked at Edward and Sarah, hesitating before continuing. "Did you notice anything unusual? Any changes that could have caused this?" Edward and Sarah exchanged looks. They didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding insane. After all, who would believe that the bond between a boy and her dog could be the key to something so miraculous? "All we know is that Rex hasn't left her side," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice calm. Maybe that helped. Dr. Axel looked at Rex, as if considering the unlikely possibility. He knew he couldn't base her conclusions on anything but science, but the intensity in the dog's gaze made him hesitate for a moment. "Well, we'll continue monitoring Maria, but I have to say this case is unique." When the doctor left, Edward approached the window, trying to find answers in the gray landscape outside. He knew something extraordinary was happening, something that defied any logical explanation. And as he looked at Rex, who now seemed even more exhausted, he felt a wave of guilt for not being able to ease the burden the dog seemed to carry. One thing was certain. Though Rex was playing a role, no one could explain what motivated him. What did he know? And more importantly, how far would he go for Maria? Rex remained by Maria's side. Her eyes now dull, and her strength visibly fading with each passing hour. Sarah felt a tighter knot in her heart as she watched the dog. He seemed to be losing something vital, but her determination to protect Maria was unwavering. Edward began to notice small changes in the dog's behavior. He no longer reacted to sounds around him and didn't even lift her head when called. It was as if her very existence was being drained. Maria, however, showed an improvement that no one could explain that afternoon. He asked to sit at the edge of the bed. Her voice, once weak, now sounded firmer. "Mom, I need Rex to stay with me even if Hune's tired," Maria said gently, holding the dog's leash. Sarah tried to hide the worry on her face, but Rex's fragility was too obvious. Still, how could she deny her daughter when he seemed to be coming back to life after a nightmare? Edward, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond her understanding was happening. During the night, he got up and went to the hospital hallway, where he stood watching the sky through the window. The stars shone brightly, but this was something unsettling about the scene. "How can this be happening?" he murmured to himself. "Why does it feel like Rex is giving something of himself to Maria?" When he returned to the room, he found Sarah sitting beside Maria, who was sleeping peacefully. Rex, as always, remained still on the floor, her eyes fixed on the boy as if standing guard. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft sound of Maria's breathing. Edward felt a lump in her throat as he approached the dog. He kneeled beside Rex and ran her hand over her head. "Whimpering, you're doing something none of us understand, aren't you? But at what cost?" The next morning, Dr. Axel turned with more test results. He seemed incredulous as he spoke. "This is no way to explain this." Maria is not only stable, but showing signs of full recovery. If this continues, he might be discharged in a few days. He looked at the parents with a mix of joy and confusion. But I have to ask, was this some intervention? We don't know about Edward and Sarah. Hesitated. How could they explain that the beating heart in that room wasn't Maria's, but Rex's, that the dog seemed to be silently fighting for her owner in a sacrifice no one knew how far it could go? What no one could ignore was that every step Maria took toward life seemed to cost a piece of Rex's vitality. Edward, unable to bear the weight of the situation, stepped out into the hallway again. This time with tears in her eyes. Something was about to happen. Something no one this could prevent. The night was silent in the hospital. Maria slept peacefully, while Rex seemed more and more fragile beside the bed on the floor. The dog barely opened her eyes, as if the weight of what he had done was draining her strength. Sarah looked at him with a heavy heart, fearing what no one wanted to admit. Rex was sacrificing himself. Edward remained by the window, watching the full moon light up the room. He felt a mix of gratitude and guilt seeing the dog so worn out. Maria, however, gently woke up and looked directly at Rex. "Mom, Dad, he's tired. I know he helped me, he saved me," the boy said, her voice weak. Sarah stroked Rex's head, tears streaming down her face. "You're our hero, Rex, but now we need to take care of you." Edward tried to sound firm, Maria. "We'll do everything we can for him, he'll be fine, just like you." Maria slowly shook her head. "He protected me when I was in that dark place now. He needs to rest," Edward decided to step out into the hospital garden, seeking a moment of clarity. Outside, under the silver moonlight, he felt a presence by her side. It was Rex, who had somehow found the strength to follow him. The dog looked at Edward with tired eyes, but they were full of purpose. Edward kneeled down and gently held Rex's face. Tears welling up. "You're telling me something, aren't you?" he whimpered. "But why does it feel like you're saying, 'Goodbye, Rex'?" Softly licked her hand before lying down on the grass. Even exhausted, her expression was one of serenity. Edward felt the dog was trying to communicate something he couldn't fully understand back in the room. Sarah noticed Edward's downcast look. "What happened?" she asked anxiously. "Haun's showing us that all of this has a purpose," Edward replied, struggling to speak. "But I think we need to prepare for what's coming next." Once again, Rex's presence brought questions without answers. How far would he go for Maria? Morning arrived quietly in room 304, but the tension still hung in the air. Maria was awake, watching Rex with eyes full of worry. The dog remained by the bed, motionless, her chest rising and falling slowly, as if each breath was a huge effort. Sarah adjusted her daughter's pillows, but her attention was on Rex. She knew something was deeply wrong, but she didn't have the courage to admit it. Edward entered the room with 2 cups of coffee. He paused for a moment, observing the scene, Maria holding Rex's leash, while Sarah gently stroked the dog's golden fur. The room was filled with a silent connection, something that went beyond words. Edward approached, handing one of the cups to Sarah. "He's still not up?" he asked, her voice soft. Sarah shook her head. "He won't leave Maria's side. It's like he's forcing himself to stay here, even if it's costing him everything." Maria looked at her parents, her voice soft but firm. "Mom, Dad, I want us to help Rex. He helped me when no one else could now. It's her turn." Edward felt a tightness in her chest as he heard those words. He knew Maria was right. But how could they help an animal who seemed to be giving up its own life out of love as he tried to find an answer? Maria added, "I feel like he needs us now more than ever." Later that day, Dr. Axel entered the room with an expression that mixed relief and curiosity. "Maria is improving incredibly. If he continues like this, we might be able to discharge him in a few days," he said. Trying not to let her disbelief show, Edward, however, couldn't fully feel Joy and Rex. he asked, pointing to the dog by the bed. Dr. Axel frowned briefly, glancing at Rex. He looks exhausted. Could be the stress animals can very sensitive to human emotions. But other than that, I don't see anything obvious. You could take him to a vet to be sure after the doctor left Edward, and Sarah decided they needed to take action. They called a local veterinarian who arrived at the hospital that afternoon. The doctor, a kind-looking woman named Ellen, examined Rex carefully. He's very tired, but I don't see signs of physical illness, she said gently, petting the dog. It's like he's emotionally drained. Did you mention that he's been very close to Maria? Edouard nodded. Her voice choked. He hasn't left Maria's side since all of this started. It's like he's protecting our daughter from something. Ellen looked at the dog with a knowing expression. Dogs have a very strong bond with their owners. Sometimes they give of themselves in ways we as humans don't understand. Rex seems to be carrying the weight of something only he can feel, as Ellen left the room. Maria called her parents over with a serious look on her face. I want Rex to know how much I love him. Do you promise he'll be okay? He asked. Her voice filled with emotion. Sarah and Edouard exchanged looks, feeling the weight of the request. They didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain. The bond between Maria and Rex was beyond anything they could explain. Night had fallen over the hospital, bringing an unusual calm to room 3-4. Maria, now sitting comfortably in bed, looked at Rex with attentive, emotional eyes. The dog remained by her side, but her energy seemed almost non-existent. Her breathing was slow, heavy, and the light in her eyes was beginning to fade. Sarah sat beside her daughter, holding her hand tenderly, while Edouard, with her hands in her pockets, stood by the window. Mom, I know Rex is tired, Maria said. Her voice soft, but filled with emotion. He's still here for me, but I feel like he's trying too hard. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. She knew Maria was right, but the thought of losing Rex was unbearable. He's strong, my love. He's done everything for you and somehow he's still protecting you. Edouard slowly turned, watching the scene with a weight that seemed unbearable. He approached the bed, crouched beside Maria, and placed her hand over her daughter's. Maria. Rex gave everything he could to save you. Maybe it's time to let him rest for a while. He did this because he loves you, but now he needs us to take care of him. Edouard's words echoed in the silence of the room. Maria looked at her father. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, Dad, but I want him to know that I'll never forget what he did for me. Never during the night, the room was immersed in an almost supernatural calm. Maria's monitor continued emitting its rhythmic signals, indicating that the boy was stable. However, by the bed, Rex seemed different. Her breathing was even slower, and he could barely keep her eyes open when she opened them. For a brief moment, he looked directly at Maria, as if transmitting a final silent message. Edouard noticed the change, and knelt beside Rex, gently stroking her head. You did something none of us can understand, kid. You gave everything for Maria. Thank you. Thank you for being part of our family. The sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky with a soft orange hue, when Maria woke up with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. He looked around the room and realized that Rex was still beside him. Her head resting on her paws, the dog had finally found peace. Sarah approached Maria, wrapping him in a tight hug. Edouard, with tears streaming down her face, placed her hand on their shoulders, creating a silent bond between them. They knew Rex had passed, but her presence was still strongly felt in the room as the sun illuminated the early moments of the morning. They all understood that Rex didn't just save Maria, but also left an eternal daughter. Unconditional love has the power to transform lives and remain alive even when the body is gone. The morning light filled room 304 with an unusual serenity. Maria held Rex's leash, her eyes fixed on the window. This was an emptiness in the room, but also a peace that no one could explain. Sarah and Edward, sitting next to their daughter, felt the weight of the loss, but also the strength of what Rex had done when Dr. Axel entered with the test results. Her expression reflected confusion. Maria isn't just improving, he's stronger than we expected. This doesn't make sense. He looked at the parents, hesitating. Is this something you're not telling me? Sarah took a deep breath before responding. It was love. Rex gave everything for our daughter. The doctor just nodded, speechless, and left, leaving behind a sense of mystery that no one could explain. Later that day, Maria asked to walk in the hospital garden with her parents. He slowly walked to a bench under a tree. He suddenly stopped and pointed to the empty lawn ahead. He's here. Edward looked at Sarah. Refused Rex. He asked. Maria smiled softly. He said he's okay, and he will always take care of us. The parents exchanged a tearful glance, feeling something beyond what they could comprehend back in the room. Maria began to draw. The result left Sarah speechless. A portrait of Rex next to a bright light, as if he were protecting the family. He wants us to know he's happy. Maria explained the drawing was placed on the wall as a reminder of the dog's sacrifice and love. That night, Maria slept soundly while Sarah and Edward sat beside him. Edward broke the silence. Rex showed us what true love is. Sarah nodded, holding her husband's hand. They knew that even though Rex was gone, he remained present in every moment, uniting the family in a unique and eternal way. The days at the hospital came to an end when Maria was finally discharged. The medical team applauded her Dieppe. Maria, still amazed by the recovery that defied any explanation, Edward carried her daughter's backpack while Sarah held her hand, helping him, walked slowly to the car in Maria's pocket. Rex's collar remained as a talisman, a symbol of the love that had brought him back home. Rex's absence was palpable. The dog's bed was still in the corner of the room, and her toys scattered about seemed to remind the family of her loyalty. Maria, however, didn't seem sad. He spent the afternoon drawing again, creating images of Rex running through green fields under a bright sky. He's happy now, Maria said with a calm smile. And he wants us to be happy too. Edward, watching her daughter, felt something stir within him, inspired by all that Rex had done. He suggested something new to the family. What if we helped this animals the way Rex helped us? We can do it in her honor. Sarah smiled, moved by the idea. I think he would love that. From that day on, the family began visiting animal shelters, helping care for abandoned dogs and finding homes for them. Maria, still in recovery, became enthusiastically involved, always sharing Rex's story with anyone who would listen. Every act of kindness seemed to strengthen the invisible bond they still felt with the dog. Time passed, but Rex's memory remained alive, not only in the hearts of Maria, Sarah, and Edward, but also in the lives of countless animals who were touched by her legacy. They understood that the love they had received never disappeared. It had simply transformed into something even greater. And so Rex's journey continued, not just as a memory, but as a force that inspired the family and everyone around them to spread the unconditional love he had shown.